As a social enterprise, the Curly Hair Project provides advice, support and information for those people who are on the autistic spectrum and those people who live, love, work with autistic people and maybe for them. So that may be parents, pet professionals, teaching assistants, caring assistants, husbands, wives, etc., etc. We also very much support autistic people, and our work is written by my boss, which is a lady called Alice Rowe. Now, Alice, A-L-I-S Rowe, is an autistic entrepreneur and author, and she's written over 25 books now, all about autism and Asperger's in old money. And she is an incredible content producer. So she's incredible at producing material that helps explain the world around autistic people and how autistic people experience the world. And she does this through The Girl with the Curly Hair. We also have the boy with the spiky hair, who's called George, and you can see him on that first screen with his puppy. So we run lots of other webinars. We run webinars around things like anxiety, sensory processing, executive function, just to name a few. We also do things very specific like autism and eating disorders and autism and gender dysphoria. So there's an idea of the different webinars that we do. And after this webinar, I will probably send you an email which has some information about the different webinars and online training that we do, which you can access, but they are events that we ask people to subscribe and pay for. So this particular event is our coping with COVID-19 and autism. And I've written this with Alice, and we realized at the beginning of this week, just Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday this week, when a carer organization called me and said, can we do anything to help people in this period of change, because they're really struggling and have lots of questions around coronavirus, what they're going to do with their families, how they can support their loved ones. And so we set about writing this particular webinar. So what we're going to talk about in the next 25 minutes or so is what is COVID-19, how might COVID-19 or coronavirus impact autistic people, and that isn't just the virus itself, it's the changes and the aspects to our world that we have to do differently. How will that impact autistic people? And then we'll look at some strategies. We've got strategies to help manage change, strategies to help manage anxiety, and strategies to help when the routine is different. So just for anybody that's just joined us since we've started, we're just in the introductions. I'll just remind you that my name is Lucy Smith. As far as this webinar goes, we've got about 30 minutes. We've got a video where you can see me, and you have a presentation screen where you can see some presentation slides. You will also have a chat pod in your view, and you can communicate with me and others via that chat pod. I don't always have a chance to answer your questions immediately, but as we're live, I can stop and I can pause and I can go back to things if we need to, and I can try and answer your questions at a suitable point. There's a hell of a lot to get through now, so I'm going to go straight into the topics. I am recording this webinar and it will be replayed, so I will send a link out so you can see it again. So to start, what is COVID-19? Okay, these are very factual statements that have been taken from nhs.coronavirus. So COVID-19 is a new illness that can affect your lungs and airways. It's caused by a virus called coronavirus. Because it's a new illness, we do not know exactly how spread cough droplets, and it's very unlikely it can be spread through things like packages or food. Now, the information that is coming out of trusted and reliable sources is growing and changing all the time. Even I heard new about we're not sure about, because we never experienced anything like this across the world in our generation. My own son, who is autistic, he made me put in those last three words around "in our generation," because he said, "Oh, well, actually, Mum, I think you'll find that the war was pretty bad." And I said, "Okay, I'll compromise here and I will write "in our generation." Everyone is confused and many people are scared. And this is a complex problem, and it is affecting the whole world. And where I talk about it being a complex problem, it isn't just the health issues that are a complex problem. The bigger impact of the health issue is how our society operates, how things like schools and shops and people react to this particular situation. It is an incredibly serious illness, so much so that our governments and others have feel forced and compelled to shut pubs, clubs, bars, schools, libraries, museums, and much more. That is not something to be taken lightly, because of the impact that it has on the rest of our daily life. Not just in that we can't go and do those things, but all of those people who will be laid off, will have significant issues around money and income in the future. So a complex problem that affects not just the health system, but also our wider communities and society as well. So at the bottom there, as I said, go to NHS Coronavirus for more information, as I find that's one of the most credible and reliable sources of information I can point you to. So I'm going to talk now about what is different. So why are we having to do things different? And what is different? In fact, I need to go back to another slide before I go into this one. So just taking a step back, this is a difficult time for everyone. The coming months are going to be difficult for all, but autistic people in particular will experience some additional challenges. Some of those examples include increased anxiety, being able to cope with change, confusion about information provided, and delayed processing of information, and family stress. So all of those things are things that you're going to feel quite acutely if you are part of an autistic family, okay? So I'm already seeing and hearing coping with change and different routines is a big challenge for people. But I'm going to talk about that in more detail a bit later. So going back to what's different, okay? We're having to do things differently, and everyone should do what they can do to stop the coronavirus spreading. In order to protect others and ourselves, we are being asked to make big changes to our lives. So some of those things are social distancing, self-isolation, and making a change to the way we do things. These changes may last for some weeks or even months. And the government, I watch the news regularly, so I am one of those people that will watch the news. And I will say later that if you find the news upsetting, it may be something that you don't want to do and should try to avoid if possible. But I watch the news regularly, and each day I can see something different happening, and that is really hard to keep up with. It might be okay if it was just one change, but every day something new is happening. Like the schools are closing, then the pubs and clubs and bars are closing. Prior to that, we had self-isolation and social distancing guidance, and it's all very confusing, but it does mean we have to live our life a bit differently. What is different? Okay, I have some examples here, and we have in the green and with the block characters, these may be neurotypical people who aren't autistic. It doesn't mean that they may not have other neurological differences or neurodiverse differences, such as ADHD or Tourette's. It just means that they're not autistic for the purposes of our presentation. So, for instance, my mum has a cough, so we have to self-isolate for 14 days. That's something different. I'm working from home to social distance. Now, if a family member is working from home and they don't usually, that can be quite challenging because you've all got to make changes to support that person at home. My cornflakes are not available in the shops. The girl with the curly hair likes to have the food she normally eats, and it not being available is quite distressing and quite frustrating. Well, not just frustrating, it's quite distressing. I'm being asked not to go to the cinema. So not only that, I wrote this before they closed the pubs and clubs and restaurants and cafes. So I'm also being asked not to go to a pub. And then the last one from George. My carer is not available today. He is sick. So a lot of people may very well be self-isolating or being socially distant. And I can hear my neighbour has just started doing some gardening, which is really pleasant. My carer is not available and he is sick. A lot of people who may be self-isolating won't be able to get to work. So, anxiety about coronavirus. Please bear with me 1 second. Not that that's made any difference whatsoever, but he has stopped. So, anxiety about coronavirus. Everyone is worried and anxious about the impact of COVID-19. I am. I'm worried that my family might be infected. I'm worried that I am and I don't know it and I'm passing it on to other people. We have never experienced a situation like this in our generation. It is absolutely something that is so new and so different and so many people couldn't ever have planned for, that it is just, it is okay to feel anxious and worried about it. Anxiety, though, can make you feel unwell and stop you being able to focus or function. That goes for everyone and not just autistic people, but many autistic people live in a kind of state of anxiety at all times anyway. It is important to remember that we are all feeling anxious and there are ways that we can help each other. We can support each other. We can support our communities. For me, I find it important to be able to do something positive and help others. And so one of the things my family and I have done, we have opened a shop in a retirement home so that the people, the 200 residents that live there, when their retirement home has been, let's say, locked down and they're unable to go out, we can provide a service with a shop for them. And that for me is helping me feel less anxious about my world because I'm able to direct it to somebody else and I'm able to give support to other people. So that is a strategy, but we'll talk about strategies in a moment. Anxiety about coronavirus and COVID-19. So everybody will have anxieties, okay? And whilst I have attributed these to either George, the boy with the curly hair, or his friend, they could come out of either one of them, regardless of whether they are neurotypical or whether they are autistic. So I'll start at the bottom on the green. I don't want my family members to get ill. Will I be able to see my grandparents? Will I even be able to see my mum? I don't want my family members to get ill. Actually, that should say, I don't want myself to get ill. I don't want to get ill myself. I don't want this to affect my daily life. And what will happen if I can't work? All of those worries and anxieties will be going on within George's friend's mind. George also thinks of things like, what will I eat if my food isn't available? Will I be safe at work and school? I don't want my family members to die. Why are people panic buying food? And why aren't other people doing the same as me? So George is thinking of a few different things. So the things like, why are people panic buying food? He can't understand it. And actually, a lot of people can't understand why people are panic buying food. From a psychological side of it, it is a reaction to fear, and it's about how how you can control and how you can gain some control over your own world and your own life by having some things that you feel make you feel secure. It doesn't help. That explanation doesn't help in any way, shape, or form. But it is a psychological kind of sociological reaction to what's going on. Coping with anxiety here. Think about what you can control. Okay, there are lots of things in this that we cannot control. I cannot control my child's school closing. I cannot control the cinema closing. I cannot control other people's shopping habits. But what can I control? I can try and control how I react to things. I can try and control how my daily life is structured, for instance. I can try and think about the things I can do, doing the things that make a difference to me and my family. Another way I would recommend, another thing I would recommend is to take time to talk about this with others. And the others should take time to listen and understand and be patient. I give my children, particularly my youngest boy who's 11, both of my sons are autistic. We didn't know until they were both 11 years old. My youngest one is 12, sorry, not 11 now, and he's 12. And I give him time specifically to talk about his worries. He might not want to talk actually, but he might draw something, or he might create some music. And I try to allow him to express himself in some way and give him that time that he needs in this really, really difficult time. Try not to watch or read the news if it is likely to trigger your anxiety. I'm a newsie. I love the news. I'm kind of there all the time, but for many people it will trigger. So try to avoid it. So the next topic to talk about is about change. So change is something that many autistic people find challenging, and autistic people find it difficult to change their routine. But in this situation right now, everyone is experiencing a change to their routine. I couldn't state something more obvious. Changes to routine will increase anxiety, and when things are scary, we often want to control other things. I mentioned earlier about fear leads to wanting to control some things. And so that can lead to challenging behavior. Now, that challenging behavior will be individual, but it may be things like self-harm. It may be things like violent outbursts. It may be things like aggression. It may be things like retreating and isolating yourself, because it's easier to shut everything out than to react or to show your emotion. Now, we do lots of other webinars, and one of our webinars in particular around anxiety and autism is something I would highly recommend for trying to get your head around these particular topics. So, coping with changes to routine. So at the Girl with the Curly Hair, we look at 4 different ways that a routine may manifest itself. So the reasons why or how a routine might manifest itself are things like when things are done. So there's a routine in the time when things are done. How things are done. So a routine in the method and the way that you do something. You don't pour the milk in that way, Mum. You pour the milk in this way. The order in which things are done, I can use that same example, but the order in which things are done, i.e. the sequence. And then finally, the desire or need to maintain sameness, which is kind of a mixture of all the 3, but it's a need and a desire to maintain that sameness and routine. At the moment, personally, I think we're seeing an impact on when things are done in terms of time, and the desire or need to maintain sameness. If you have wiped out completely a whole school routine, then actually this is really hard to think about how your routine has changed. So you might want to think about things like, when things are done, trying to create a routine that is roughly around the same as a school routine, for instance, or a work routine. And on the next slide, we've got some more examples. So coping with changes in routine. Now, routines help create order, structure, and predictability. Routines help manage anxiety. The girl with the curly hair, in fact, Alice herself will write and talk about routines, and having those routines helps her manage her daily life because it helps manage her anxiety. It is helpful to encourage routines and, in this situation, develop new ones. You're going to have to think about and develop new routines. I'm going to give you a bit of cheerleading advice here. Most of you have probably done this before in your life, and you can do it now. You absolutely can do it now, but it may be a bit painful. And I'm saying that in terms of, over a few days, you might find that there is some kickback or there is some anxiety around those new changes and those routines, but you can do it. The difficulty that we're facing at the moment is that quite often I'm seeing the news come out one day, and then the next day we're having to change again and we've got another new routine. Initially, it may be an idea to treat this as you would a school holiday. And I've seen lots of things online about homeschooling and getting the kids to do schoolwork and having a routine. And then I've seen lots of memes of people saying, I've just tried to homeschool my children today for the first 4 hours, and now I know why teachers get paid quite well, and they should get paid more, because you will find it quite difficult and quite challenging. And one of the pieces of advice I would give as a parent is to say, look, your children are going to learn a hell of a lot through this whole period. It's going to be an incredible learning experience for them. Things like sorting out their breakfast, tea and lunch. Actually get involved with that, kids. Life skills time. There are so many different things that you can be doing as a family rather than just thinking about schoolwork. Also, you need to make the time to talk about things and react to the fact that actually you're working under increased pressure right now. Try to make new routines feel familiar. Having for instance, a FaceTime call with a friend who's in the same class. That may very well help somebody get used to the fact that actually this is my routine at home now, but I can still see my friend. And then the last one, social stories can help explain changes. There are quite a few social stories out there. I found one through the National Autistic Society website, and I would highly recommend looking on their site. I will also be able to send out a link via an email later today. So changes in routine again. It may be difficult to find time for yourself, and alone time is very important. It may be difficult to manage family relationships, brothers, sisters, that sibling rivalry, parents who don't get along with their children, and parents who don't like spending time with their children. It's all going to be very, very difficult sometimes. It may also not be possible to take part in some of the things you enjoy, the cinema, going to the pub, having a catch up with your friends. You can't do those things at the moment. You may need to work or study online, which is going to be different, and you need to help with planning and getting into a new routine around that. And you may need to support family members who need to work or study online. So it might not be you having to make the changes, but they do, and it would be helpful if you can support them. So the next topic I'm going to talk about is about communication. So there are two aspects to this that I want to talk about, and the first one being communication about feeling ill. Now, in my family, it is often I have to be extremely vigilant to find out whether or not my own children are ill, because they don't tell me straight off. They quite often will wait until they're very ill before they say, I don't feel very well. And I may not always notice it. So sometimes autistic people may not know and may not express how they are feeling. It's important to tell others if you feel unwell, because that is a necessary aspect of the self-isolation rules around the virus. I can feel my hay fever kicking in now. I did say earlier that I get hay fever and I'm in a garden shed, and it's starting to kick in now. Others may need to be extra vigilant and notice when autistic individuals appear unwell. In our house, we have a thermometer in the ear, and we check our temperatures 3 times a day at the moment, because I can never tell sometimes when my children feel ill, and so I have to say, right, temperature check, here we go. It may also be difficult to explain to an autistic family member that they have to do things differently, or if they're unwell, or if a member of their family is unwell, because that theory of mind and thought process is of, well, actually, I don't feel ill, so why do I have to do anything different? Processing the information about COVID-19. So this is another side of the communication aspect of it. There's a lot of information and news about coronavirus, and some of that is vague and unclear. Vague and being unclear is not helpful for autistic people. Communicating with an autistic person, it is helpful to be clear and literal. It is difficult also to identify the fake news from the real news. And other people, though, there is a reason for this sometimes. They may not have the clear answers because they really don't know. And you'll notice that when experts are being spoken to and speaking about coronavirus on the news, they don't know the answers. So here's some advice I would give. Try to refer to legitimate sources of information. I would always recommend nhs.coronavirus as a reliable source. I would also recommend autism.org.uk, which is the National Autistic Society, as a reliable resource. Try not to read the news if it may trigger anxiety. And the final point, take time to process new information if you can, and ask questions from trusted sources. As an individual, you may very well need to find those trusted sources yourself and know who they need to be. And the final points I will make about this, about processing information and the coronavirus in general, this situation will change constantly. I can't do anything about that. I know it will change again, and I know it will, yes, I'm just going to stop at that one. I want to say to try to focus on what is happening now and follow advice to keep you and others safe. And the final point I want to say, which was what I was going to go into a second ago, this will pass. Things, however, may not be normal for some time. Now, what I'd like to say is that we will update this webinar regularly to try and reflect any changes. It's already slightly out of date in terms of we wrote it and then the schools have closed down. But it's a very high level webinar. We are producing another webinar, which will be an hour long, which will go into much more detail and provide more strategies on how to cope with COVID-19. But that will be a paid webinar, and we will advertise that through our usual sources. So please look out for it. We also have lots of topics and webinars running throughout the week in the evenings, usually around anxiety, executive function, sensory processing, meltdowns and shutdowns, etc., etc. What I would say is that as a small business ourselves, and I'm a freelance trainer, so I'm one of those people that has lost an income because I can't go out and do my job. If you like what you hear here and you want to hear more and would like to join us for our webinars and can join us and book for one of our paid webinars, we would love you to join us. Please do support us. It allows us to continue supporting lots of other autistic people and their families, and we would just really appreciate that. So I would just say support some more businesses if you can. We'd really be grateful. And for more information, here's our contact details. I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to stop recording. And I would love to hear from you if you want to type anything into the chat pod. I will be online for a few more minutes, but please get in touch if you want anything. Please get in touch if you'd like any more information. And if you've got questions and I can answer them, I will try my best. Thank you. Take care, and hopefully I'll hear and see from you.